The Mating School by Jonas Mears, Chapters 17 and 18. Chapter 17. I still don't know who Miss Art is or why she would give me that note, said Lily as she and Anne walked through some sort of garden maze which was complete with hidden sitting spaces with cushioned benches. Maybe she just wants you to read the book, said Anne. But we did read it. Not all of it. Maybe there's other information you need to know, said Anne. Yeah, I doubt that, said Lily, taking a turn that seemed to lead deeper into the garden area. For all we know, it was just a prank. The book gave us useful information, though. Weren't we just wondering the other day how lichens are created? And the book gave that information. Who's to say what other information it might hold? Said Anne, skipping a step to catch up with where Lily was smelling a soft white daffodil. Maybe, said Lily, looking up again. But if there was something she wanted me to read specifically, maybe she would have put a bookmark in the book or something. Do you think she was sitting behind us in Life Principles and read our notes? How else would she know we were wondering about those things? When Anne didn't answer, Lily continued. Fine, I'll finish reading it. It's just that, even if it has other information to gather, well, it's interesting and everything, but also, it's not relevant. It's not what I need to be focusing on right now. I have enough on my plate with trying to shift and catch up with my classes. We're not even a week in, and I feel like I'm years behind. Then again, I guess that's not so far from the truth. It could be relevant, said Anne. For all we know, you could be mated to a lichen or something, said Anne. Yeah, right, said Lily with a laugh. If that's true, I'll name my first daughter after you. You never know, said Anne, walking towards a fenced path. Aren't you interested in figuring out the lichen stuff? Lily paused to think about what to say. She knew Anne was fascinated by the topic. Not just the lichens, but also the prophecy. And it wasn't that Lily wasn't interested, just that. I have a lot on my plate right now is all, she said to Anne. Fair enough, said Anne. But Lily could see she was puzzling about something. She wondered if maybe they were right on top of the answer, but somehow weren't seeing it. There's something I don't understand, though, said Lily. If this Miss Art is a friend, why wouldn't she just give the information to me directly and tell me why it mattered? It could be lots of reasons, said Anne. Maybe it was just easier to have the message delivered. Maybe, said Lily. Maybe not, said the voice in the back of her mind. Part 2. As the weeks passed, the schedule started to become the norm for Lily. Waking up at 6 a.m. to gather information, study, and try to shift had become habitual. Her motivation was so focused that despite remaining at the bottom of her classes, and despite not having success with her shifting, she was able to maintain her hope and momentum. She felt like everything would be a lot easier if her cold and cough would go away. As the weeks turned into months, and the snow on the grounds below the castle began melting, she decided it was time to ask about the illness in the infirmary. Her visit consisted of the general tests, as the healers had done on her first visit. But they didn't seem concerned about her symptoms, certainly not concerned enough to excuse her from classes. Lily decided their lack of concern meant they knew she couldn't shift. Otherwise, their lack of concern didn't make sense to her. Heading to her next class, she took solace in the fact that, since the other students were shifters, they were unlikely to catch what she was suffering from. As she walked, she thought about the orphan family she'd left behind. She thought about how she promised to do whatever she could to get them a better life. It was rare for a day to go by that she didn't think about them in some measure. She knew that her best chance at helping those she loved was at this school. As such, she was grateful that despite her current poor marks in her classes, she wasn't kicked out. She was grateful, too, that, for now at least, no one seemed bothered about her inability to shift. It's good to be grateful, she decided, as she turned to enter the classroom. And yet she couldn't help feeling like she was somehow missing something. Chapter 18. practice and focus on something enough, and it starts to seem like it's no longer a question of if it'll happen, but rather when. Hope for the desired change isn't some elusive and flighty emotion, but instead, it becomes a solid landmark in day-to-day life. That's how thoughts of shifting had become for Lily. She'd expected to shift for the first time during some independent morning study session. She had thought it would happen in a private practice room or maybe in her dorm in the evening before bed. Instead, her first shift started on her way to general agility class. There was pain in her stomach and a feeling of lightheadedness and vertigo. There was a sense of panic also, not entirely knowing what was happening. It all started so suddenly. She'd been exploring the forested area on the fourth-floor courtyard. She'd taken up a habit of walking after lunch. It seemed that hour was her only free time in her day. The walks allowed her an outlet for stress. When she was out exploring, she felt at peace. She felt like herself again, who she had been before she became an orphan, and made to carry the low ranking and endure the sadness and lack of respect that accompanied it. She felt worlds away from the school and the challenge and hardship that accompanied it. Spring had taken root, and yet her efforts resulted in underwhelming progress in Lily's mind. It didn't matter to her that she was essentially human running in a shifter's race. It mattered that the opportunity was there for her. One of the few opportunities that had been granted to her thus far in her life. She was glad Anne wasn't there when the first shift started. She wasn't sure why, just that it seemed like a private thing, a potentially embarrassing thing. She was a long way from the forest, in the open, grassy space between where the class would start and the open seating area where students sometimes hung out during breaks or after class. She couldn't be sure if it was lucky that there were only about 15 students in the area, or if it was unlucky that it didn't happen when she was in a private practice or study room or even in her dorm room, especially when so much of her time was spent in those places. She turned to return to the forest that she'd come from, but it was too far away. The pain in her stomach intensified. She sat down. It wasn't like she fell to her knees, but rather, intentionally sat down on the grass, as if she was going to stop there and eat a granola bar or something. Maybe this way others wouldn't notice anything is wrong. Maybe she'd turn into a rat. Something so small that no one would even notice. Maybe not, said the voice in her mind. Part 2. Lily wasn't sure what happened. She might have blacked out. She was laying down in the grass now, though. She rolled to her side and vomited. Her vision blurred. There were some shouts from a distance off. Maybe someone else passed out and collapsed and made a big scene, Lily thought, a bit desperately. She imagined them yelling and rushing towards someone else, allowing her to be alone and more comfortable. And in the private space of her mind, she could be. She'd always heard that the first shift was painful. Sharp, agonizing pain in the bones and muscles as they twisted and realigned in the new form. But it wasn't like that. It was entirely different. She felt like she was floating in a vast, still lake. A lake full of clear, warm, comfortable water that seemed to seep through her skin and muscles to warm the coldness in her bones. The warmth seemed to ease the transformation somehow. Lily couldn't be sure how long it took, but it didn't seem to matter here in this lake of serenity. She could feel her body changing, but it wasn't like one arm first and then one leg, but instead everything shifted in such a slight way, like sand falling from the top of an hourglass to change the mound of sand that was below. Her muscles move of their own accord, like a twitch, but smooth and more constant, like the feeling one might get placing their hand on the polished wood of a cello as a low, calming, steady note was played. as if the frequency vibrated through her muscles, then deep in her bones. Her whole body seemed to hum with the radiant energy and power of it. Her very being seemed to shift in ways she never could have imagined. She couldn't be sure what would come of it, but it didn't seem to matter. All that mattered was the moment and the feeling. All that mattered was the energy and sheer power of her transformation. Through bleary eyes, she could see a small crowd of students had gathered around her. She could sense them in the space around her. Their whispering knitted through the air and seemed to hover over the space like a thick blanket. And yet them being there didn't matter. Only hours ago, she would have felt bothered by it. But now, in this new form with this new awareness, the students and their gossiping might have been a world away. For Lily, all there was sensation, freedom, and a radiant sense of power. And it was incredible.